나는 저게 다 심지어 담지 동화다 라나님 베게도 동화 자와시베 니치모고 미알아 네 제라시 심지어 담지 라레 진치보다 그린치보 임바 도시삼다 되네 심지어 담지 진치보 그린치보 인자 되네게야 랑기 콘돌야 아니 펜바시 두고도 제사다 칸바 두고에 가르치는 콘도 동화 날도 동화다 자고도 지도 동화나 자나 샘베게 되니지게 되네니지게네 되네 동화다 자야다 소소히 닝이 동화다 자와다 게 지기 샘베 섬다제 되네 징닝도 게제 라바 라삼남다 세차고래 되네 지긴 샘베 섬다제 되네 네 바톤을 kom야디 소소히 심지어 탐지기 네 동화다 동의 요념바 바샤의 제파차상수 렌제 소소 랄류레 팀바 뭐바제 아니 소소기 류심이 디기다 아니 게베 디기요 게와 강이바 탐지 아니 심지어 바땅 본줄 바팀 되네 심지어 탐지 지류대와 심기와 되네 게저 해제 안에 소사 tip지하지 되네 산요고보 토송선 비기 매바제 도신 공부를 해서 된것도 되니기 쉬워야 되셔게.
Good afternoon. So this morning we looked at how to develop the mind of great compassion, the indispensable quality that leads to the attainment of all the great qualities of the paths. And we saw that one needs to develop great compassion, which is the wish that may all sentient beings without exception gain freedom from suffering and its causes, and in particular the afflictions and the seeds of the afflictions. One first trains by recalling the kindness of all sentient beings. And I went through the meditation whereby we come to recognize sequentially, starting with our parents and then moving on, about the kindness, the impact they have on our lives, so that we develop a tenderness towards all. As we develop a tenderness towards all, the wish for them to be happy, to abide free of suffering, arises within us. And this is when our compassion is starting to arise. And we develop it ever further to the point where we develop a wholehearted resolve, a determined attitude. I myself will guide all beings so that they attain a state freed of suffering, so that they abandon their afflictions together with their seeds. And then, to bring this about, we engage in the meditation of taking and giving, whereby all the suffering that beings are experiencing, as well as their karmic seeds that will lead to further suffering, we imagine taking these on and giving all our virtue to them. The causes for happiness we have accumulated, we give to them. And in this way, we imagine beings gaining freedom from suffering and abiding in the lasting happiness of Buddhahood.
디네 검제다 먼저 심지어 담지 동화다 자와쇼 스피 동화다 자나 스피 된 동화다 자와다 게 스피 삼단에 되네 두신의 동련진의 동화 출례 레하다 된 수수께와디 디기디 파당 두스콤 디네 자다 디네 심지어는 저 동화다 자와다 게 스피 삼단에도 디네 제 심지어 담지기 돈달이야 사유고 번더버 쇼 스피 전슈 심게리 디용고르디 제리용고레.
Just prior to engaging in the meditation, taking and giving, one generates wholehearted resolve, this determination whereby one says, it is my responsibility to help others. I will do so. And then one engages in the meditation on taking and giving. And this we use as a basis to generate bodhicitta itself, which is in order to actually guide beings to a state freed of suffering, I need to become the most skilled of guides. I need to become a Buddha. For their sake, I commit to becoming a Buddha.
이사 심정이 동아세다 심정이 디기 두비야래 심정래 판도치야다 다타 데레 초도 교바 상기마도 매래셔. 지나다 상기기 감나 심정이 감나 몇바지다 와시도 켄두바데 상기마도 요 말에 제사다 캠바인자 데려야 최 가르친 거 그냥 콘술력 동화시한 디기주비야 가르친 거 바데 가르치는 판도 최 여바디 상이 긴 거래. 근데 안에 상이 최 된비갑래야 근데 주변에서 된지 코로나 감다 매바다 코로나 된비 고연 지 제투에게 되는 남바 된지네 최소에 대한 상기를 요. 제사다 샘진이 동화시야 돼 샘진 디기주비에 탑초도 유바데 상이 고바래. 제사다 샘진 탐지 동화시야다 디기주비야라 샘진 탐지 강아시야리야 다다 디니기 탑초도 유바 상이 고바데 마답나 탑미도 제베데네 샘진 탐지 상이 고바 탑쇼 제베 자주 샘게 데네 자주 샘게네 샘진 상이 고바 탑이 철도 데네 바로도 심부 줄이야 냠면지 세베 냠면지 지마다 수준서버 전에 선배시라기 파지 님 줄이야 냠면지에 용 거래.
When one generates great compassion, one wants all beings to gain freedom from suffering, which in particular means freedom from the afflictions and the seeds of the afflictions. And with this motivation, one develops this motivation so that one takes it as one's personal responsibility. It's not one is not satisfied with this mere wish, may all beings be free from suffering and its causes, but one develops the wholehearted resolve, this mind of altruistic mind of special intention, whereby one says, this is my responsibility to make sure that each being is guided so that they come to gain their freedom. When wholehearted resolve is generated, though, one also recognizes, whilst I will, this is my responsibility, I lack the capacity to accomplish this ability, this aspiration, because I am limited myself. I'm still impeded by the afflictions and various obstacles. And moreover, beings are diverse in their own karmic backgrounds and inclinations. I don't really know how to help each one perfectly because of my own limitations. Therefore, I have to spiritually develop and I need to become a perfected being, a Buddha. So this is part of the resolve of the mind of bodhicitta, whereby one commits to becoming a Buddha. And the second part is in order to lead all beings to liberation, to their own enlightenment. So this is the mind of enlightenment, mind of bodhicitta, whereby the practitioner who has just developed wholehearted resolve, taken responsibility to help others, makes the commitment that in order to help others, I have to become a Buddha, the most skilled of guides who can help beings perfectly in accordance with their own individual disposition and inclination, be able to have limitless emanations appearing in worlds and forms that are ideally suited to each being, and with being able to interact with others in the most skillful of ways because of beings' individual karmic predispositions, their own personalities. They require intervention, guidance in varying forms. So I must become a Buddha. Nothing else matters. I need to become a Buddha for the sake of others. And then finally, in order to make this happen, to become a Buddha, I need to accumulate the causes. Therefore, I commit to engaging in the six perfections, practicing the six perfections. The perfections of generosity, ethical restraint, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, and wisdom.
디기 차상 가르코베네 셴레 때는 중고를 양랑기 근데 탈바 탐제 김보 고반 토비게 개위자 와서야 돼 셴레 때는 중고래서 제가 셴레 때는 주고한데 셴 마디어바제 네 된주요 말했어요 가상 쉬바데 지바 다 자와시도 첨부차데 제상은도 가르이네 셴실을 때는 주고 강라에 마디어바 랑응wen의 주디어지 요 말해서 내가 동반이 시비 갈라 제바지비 갈라 된진 저와 주와 섬다 가르이네 먼저 나와야지 강을 뛰는 현실을 뛰는 주범모도 나서야 돼. 현 풍봉하고 강을 뛰는 발로 따바진 모두 강을 모두 랑응원의 주바지 모두 랑응원의 주바지 요 말에서 가서 쉬버와 Dinashida, do Kasa Samta, Duki Samta, Diri Pingore, Diring Samtadi, Kasanga Share del Pingore, Cesar Diring Azu gave Karuna, gave our Rangi Tiki Karuna Shala Dune Yungudu, Rangi Sayatuya, Dulo Tachasa, Twins and Shala Dune Yungudu, since Shala Matuba Korong, Rangi Dupigin, Rangi, that Geshe Kaina Ragmin was. Cesar Rangi gave our Taba Tamji came to gave our side there, Shala Dune Yungudu was, Cesar Shala Dune, but the Kawar Shine, Shala Dune, Dupu Mado, Shala Kanshila Matuba, Rangon to be Kawaja me. Dungada Kanga Karana Shala Dune, Duma Kala Matuba, Rangon to be Dungada Kanga Cheka, Yomalese. Do some Dada, on the Dishoke. Simjan Tamchel Dune, Yungur, Simjan Dune, Dugo, as a singer, do to get Namshati Shing, and Jeza, Denigi, Tony some died, the Inji come not due to some died, Domba Toba and Pingore, Kazan, Domba Topic, Domba Yuko Chepachi, Dune, Tuba, Kala, Matu, Rangon, to a Yoma, Chepa, to get some died, the Inji come back, Dele Pingore.
Where we've come to is a meditation on taking and giving, which followed generating great compassion, which followed recalling the kindness of all others and wanting to repay their kindness. This meditation that we've been looking at today is developed in dependence on the prior meditation on meditating on emptiness. So these two meditations on emptiness and bodhicitta, these have an interdependent relationship in that the one aids the cultivation of the other. So yesterday, if we look at the text, at the first of the 6 points, the first of the points we've looked at thus far in the main practice, consider all phenomena as being like a dream. So to look at this term again, all phenomena, which means anything and everything that exists. So we take that, so anything and everything that exists is like a dream in the sense that it appears in one way, but it does not exist in that way in reality. It is empty of existing by way of its own nature or independently, but is rather a dependent arising, dependent on causes, parts, labeling by mind. So this is what we looked at earlier. So the meditator, now meditating on bodhicitta, has this understanding in mind. So whilst they're meditating on the kindness of others, and they're in the relationship with others, this understanding of interdependence and emptiness will be pervading their meditation. So this morning, this wasn't mentioned explicitly at all, but the skilled meditator will nevertheless be meditating on the kindness of others with an understanding of dependence and arising and emptiness. In that, the meditator reflects that in dependence on others, I have the food to eat, clothing to wear, I have this very life, I have the opportunity or the education to accumulate virtue, and I have the opportunity in that I interact with others to accumulate virtue. So every one of these expressions is an instance of dependence arising. In other words, or to say it again, these clothes, I have independence on others, which means it's come about independence on causes. It is not inherently existent. So too, my educations come about independence on others. It's not inherently existent. So too, my education and my opportunity to express my Dharma education and accumulate virtue comes about independence on others. And whatever is a dependence arising is necessarily empty of inherent existence. Or to express it in a different way, whatever is a dependent arising is not independent. So therefore, as one is here meditating on conventional bodhicitta, one is also reflecting on dependent arising and therefore emptiness. So in this way, one's meditation on compassion is enhanced by one's meditation on dependence arising and emptiness. And earlier in the meditation, when one is meditating on dependence arising and emptiness, so the first 4 points, there one's overriding motivation is to be of benefit to others. So this was developed in the preparatory practices, where one goes for refuge and bodhicitta. The very purpose of this meditation, when one's meditating on emptiness, is so that one can become a Buddha for the sake of others. So therefore, there is an interdependent relationship between the meditations on dependence arising and emptiness and great compassion and bodhicitta. So within the second of the 7 points, we come to the 7th one. Secondly, mount those 2 upon the breath. So the term mount those 2 upon the breath. So what does the 2 refer to? It refers to taking and giving. So what we just had in the line before. So mount those 2 upon the breath. One is here encouraged to perform the meditation in conjunction with one's breathing. So with the inhalation, one imagines taking the suffering from others. Then with one's exhalation, imagines giving our virtue and happiness to others. So when one breathes in, one imagines taking all the physical suffering of beings, as well as all their mental suffering, and any potential, the karmic seeds for suffering, and inhaling that, dissolving within one's own body. And then exhaling all one's happiness and the seeds of virtue, giving these to others, and it dissolving into them.
닝제 제주 닝제 디응안에 다심제 동안의 자와의 예치엔 디게데 템바의 예치기 세별 아선의 예치 되는 심제 함지게 동안 노은 수 우태야도 심제의 동안 탐제 차산수 링유에서 뭐바자다 근데 운 파탄에도 되네 랑게 디게다 계획자와 탐제 건설 땅 다제 다 건설의 디게 중 근데 소사 집자 제네 되는 산요고 뭐 토픽 뭐바 루시네 공부를 롱파 당소나 되네게 다진 소소라는 게 지게 가제 되도도 두시네 고미하지 송인사를 송도와
One utilizes the breath for taking and giving, and one utilizes the breath as if it was the vehicle by which one brings the suffering and the causes of suffering to others to oneself, and that vehicle then enters oneself and dissolves within, and then that same vehicle then is loaded with one's virtue and all happiness and joy, and then that vehicle is sent to other beings and dissolves into them. So this is how one utilizes the breath in this way, as a vehicle or pathway by which one takes the suffering and gives virtue and happiness to others. And with the exhalation, or with the inhalation, one imagines alleviating their suffering, that beings becoming a light in the sense of their burden or suffering is being removed. And by giving them happiness, sending the vehicle along the pathway with our two accumulations of virtue, then one imagines them attaining all the qualities of the Dharma and even attaining Buddhahood.
안데네 다 유숨 두숨 계자숨세 제자다 도시네 아주 유숨 세리 땅아줄이야 유딜이야 지다 유리야 안에 두바다 미두바다 안에 바르마세지 안에 수명고래 제래 제자다 유숨이어봐서 유숨라미 비게다 되샤셔다 디무숨기 고래 제다 그래서 유숨세 유두바들 때네 안에 되샤 유니지고라 통나 될라 차바게다 안에 이름이 뭐를 있잖아 될래 때네 안에 콘트 계산지 콘트기야 되네 바마로 지나 되네 디무기야 제사 되샤셔다 디무숨데 제사 당하는 저기 아주 심제 수도 수인데 아니 그 유가르나면에 가브레 야혼난 거 가브레 야혼며 받는 거 가브레 남미 발매는 거로 봐 제사다 야혼 나도 어텔에 베베 차바기야 아니 딩하고 고구스메 차바기 차베디 원게다 지게 류가게 쥐봐 담마를 지네 지게 젠이야 강아지야 라라 강아라시니까 강아지 동아리 된 중고래스 다 유미두바 통하는데 미두바 통에 대라미 비고 콘롤라 아니 셈 유미두바 통에 대라셈 이 미디와 셈마기바게 셈마기바게 베긴 소를 대라야 콘롤라 근데 콘롤라가 류가게 쥐봐 ngamba 디 콘롤이 제부 디 류가게 쥐봐 ngamba 레세 디 아니 라라 셴라 강아지야다 라라 강아라시니까 동아리한테 중고래스 다 유바마를 통도 다 디무게네데 안시 남미야 샤네 데네게 통네 아니 지금 용어레스 제자 데네자다 데네 용어자 데네게 셈제 탐절야다 강아제 유 녀모바 두숨디 디 유숨라 미베게 나 유숨 네 야보 나와다미 지금 이루와 나와다 이루묘와 나와다 바마 나와 디숨라 데네 되샤샤다 디모게 니왕기 다 셈제네게 강아제라 라신이가로 동아 강아 용어티디 용도와 셈베 삼다제 데네 삼다네 데네 셈제네 동아단 자야라 데네 두숨티단 자고도 데자 셈제네 동아 대신하지다 셈제 동아단 자고 동아 자와는 이지 세베 니제 도스키에제네 데네 셈제 담지기 용어 제네 되샤체다 디모스노 수 렌제 안소솔야 아니 팀비 메바제다 다 셈제를 패디 가르 팽기도스나 다 되네 한류 고서 계획자와 개화디게 핑고레스 제자다 되샤미아바 디무디 도초 되샤기 도초 되샤미아바다 shedangi dojo shedan meba timu dojo timu meba disuma shedan meba dojo timu se di pingo ra chesan di yukonzol semjana di kugo sembe ta rang gyule yoba de denegi dosha meba da shedan meba timu mebe gewe zawa de chasan pa semjal pa daje konzol jungshi konzol digi de temba jungsong sembe denegi meba cheche da semjan tamji dusumdo su le sosoge le rangi yujida gesa ti pa tang ji lusin donglen je komye sumore yusum dusum gesa sum ja 근데 제가 두숨마도 유가자데 반샤고로 해서 그래라 이 두숨데 다디 두신의 삼당 오래서 송도와
Continuing to look at the meditation on, or continuing to engage in the meditation on taking and giving, we come to the 8th point: 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 roots of virtue. So we will continue to engage in taking in terms of the 3 poisons and giving in terms of the 3 roots of virtue. So what this refers to is in relation to 3 general groupings of objects, then the 3 poisons arise. So, and what beings require so as not to give rise to the 3 poisons are the 3 roots of virtue. So if we divide objects into 3 groups, so objects, it's not necessarily material, it's objects of mind. So whatever the mind is engaged with, maybe material, maybe something else, maybe a person, maybe a consciousness. So if we divide objects into 3 groups, that which is neutral, that which draws us towards it, and that which that repulses us away from. So there are 3 groups: that which you're neutral towards, that which you like and dislike. So what draws us towards it or repulses us from. So 3 groups of objects. Now, when beings, ordinary beings, the way they relate to these 3 groups of objects is by means of the 3 poisons. So neutral objects, beings have an attitude of confused ignorance. Objects which that draw the being towards them, that they find attractive, this is the mind of attachment. And objects that repulse ordinary beings, these engage with the poison of anger. So in this way, the 3 poisons of confused ignorance, attachment, and anger are how one relates to objects in general. And it's through the arisal of the afflictions that beings thereby create the causes for further suffering. They speak unskillfully, act unskillfully, and so forth. So, whilst engaging this meditation on taking and giving, one will have long since understood the workings of the afflictions, how they rise in relation to an object, and being an affliction, they lead to the accumulation of the causes of suffering. Here then one imagines taking these 3 poisons and dissolving them within oneself, and giving the 3 roots of virtue. And the 3 roots of virtue are the opposite to the 3 poisons. So non-confused ignorance, non-attachment, and non-anger. So these minds, non-confused ignorance, non-attachment, and non-anger, one imagines giving, so as beings no longer operate under the causes for suffering, the 3 poisons, but rather the causes for happiness, the 3 roots of virtue.
도숨 세대 되셔 셔다 디모 대상한도 동아 탐지 중에 유 라신이가 코와로 코리아게 코리 다디버 내리게 유조디 도숨레 되셔 셔다 디모숨레 제사 디니자 되셔 셔다 디모숨데 방고고 매버쇼고 오래제 다 디링링한도 도시네 다 현이스 도시레곰 소한테 소수게 인도 자야게 내내게 소수바 지금 인도 내내게 돈에 자야디 곰야디 수레 바데제 제레 다为你最怕都送半夜过面的，看上去东一些到公司这把接东一到过面的，其实的东一到公司，所以说这把接东把一多，但那个这个都送就打算马里巴莫把马里巴是话的，就是现在地木来的地木莫把马里巴打算的马里巴是过来，其实你看上去完的打算马里巴的没有所以了呀，的 Ganesh do, say Jebachi, Nawanashi, do it, Midu Jebachi, do, Chesan, Nawanashi, Rango Windu, Nawa Savaki, Midu, Simatoidi, Dombani, Tongo, Dini Toy, Dilu to Combala, Dino Comne, Casio Comne, Shu Shesher Tadu, and then doesn't Momba Mariba, Shu Shun to war, doesn't marry Momba the Kazu Shu Shun, Deja Shella, the Union to wars, or do Sene, Tangwin is when they bounce to the Dini Pai, Rangu Comne, Dini Bang, Shengi, do some the Meva Soyala, Shenlia, Deniki, do some Payageta, Dombany, David, Namsha Pa, Den, Console, Den, how go you, then Yamsu Lenjo, Gom Japjuche, Paya Dire. Then do you say that Timuk doesn't matter? The Timuk Lana have more silver. The other doesn't marry by doesn't marry by member, doesn't member Timo Mumba, machine by Yungruada. She said that they do some city doesn't marry by the whole. That Timu Dinzi, the Paya, Canis Pangu, never one year said it, and we need to do members, Canis who is in it. Tomba to be low com ne meva so horela. That tomba to be low compala, Tambo tomba in the Java don't you talk or water. Chesan Casan Shedi, Chesan Shedi, that to tomba in Toy or Sherwa, Chesan there, doesn't Timu never say, we need to never say disease. Chesada socio gule meva sevana, Tambo tomba in Java, tomba in Lodo compala, Tene, Timu Tinzi meva so horres. That Semjan Tamji, Semjin Yugi, Timu Tinzi meva sevala. And the Gadisur, so some of the Lembergi, Mel, so to a last guy, to a mel, so to him, we need to tone that Mel Sevala, Consulia, Gansa, Pajulia, Tony Gorshi, Den, Tony, Denting, Namsha, Tombani, Den, call Yam, Dokju, Yamsu, Lenjo, Gomju, Jedine, call you Densemari by Mel, so yes, and this win is it. Then this is Sombana, San Yachim, that Chingy Tembatim, draw accuracy, I think in Denigi, Tombany, Tempi, Denigi, Tico, Denigi, Namsha, She, Johnsolia, and the Yomo Pai, Namsha, Yempoti, Titis, she, then Johnson, Yamsulu, Comje, then Johnson, call to Buddha said, not this. That did you do some of the Tonley community, so sugi into Payada, so sugi, some Shuchata, didn't that.
The three poisons are that of confused ignorance, attachment, and anger. So this confused ignorance is a broad category which relates to where one lacks knowledge, where one is confused and ignorant, doesn't know what to do. Within that category is also the ignorance in relation to reality, how we misperceive reality. So this is something we spoke about in depth yesterday. So bearing in mind now the meditator, prior to the meditation on taking and giving, they would have been meditating on emptiness. So they would have been aware of the role that the ignorance of self-grasping plays in suffering. And in the preliminary meditation, the preliminary practices, there, when meditating on true sufferings and true origins, again, they would have been aware of the role that ignorance plays in terms of the afflictions and thereby our suffering. So what I'm pointing to here is how one's prior meditations aid the later meditations. It's really a circular process whereby prior meditations aid later meditations, and as the later meditations develop, the earlier meditations strengthen too, because the themes are replicated or continue throughout the various sequence of trainings. They're not isolated. So when one is meditating on taking and giving, one has meditated on cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, and then so the first 4 steps, and before that in the preliminaries, one was also meditating there on the need to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, the antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping. So therefore now, when one is engaging in this meditation on taking and giving, one is imagining taking on suffering, giving roots of virtue. But within that, one has the very clear understanding of what beings require to be free of suffering, which is to come to recognize true sufferings and their origins and cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness to eradicate ignorance of self-grasping. So this isn't what one is necessarily calling to mind whilst one is engaging in taking and giving, but one is very aware of that. One has just been meditating on that previously. So therefore, one knows this is what I need to do to gain freedom. This is what others need to gain their freedom. I need to become really skilled in this, not just so that I can gain my own freedom, but so that I can guide others to gain their freedom. And this then too links with the motivation of bodhicitta, whereby one commits to becoming a Buddha for the sake of others, so that one can guide them well. And that too then links to the verse from Sutra that I mentioned this morning, where the Buddha is saying, I cannot wash away the suffering, the non-virtue of beings with water. I cannot remove their suffering with my hands. I cannot bestow my qualities upon them. I can only help by teaching and them striving to liberate themselves. So with all of this in the back of one's mind, one is engaging in this practice of taking and giving and thereby giving us a greater strength to apply oneself to this entire process of meditation. For example, to apply oneself to the meditations on emptiness so that one can become ever more skilled and thereby act out this process of giving the Dharma. So therefore, I hope from this explanation, it's clear why the preliminaries are indispensable for the main practice and how the main practice too, the two parts, they aid each other and aid the preliminaries. So there is this circular process whereby one training builds on another, and as the latter training develops, the prior ones also develop.
And
then the ninth subpoint, train by applying these words in all activities.
지산 줄럼 군도 치기 자세 다 치기 장탄에 간래라나 아니 심제 탐지게 다 동하다 내나서 강아 다 요모바 디기 요요 요모바데 제바 차상 다라미 버쇼스나 칸바 라고레스 다게 계획자와 안에 계획에 대화다 계획자 폰소바 카인 심제 탐지를 미미 용화 중화쇼 지다 심제 탐지 디기데 템버쇼 세네 되네 치글바 치기도 슬랍제 치기 두네 람데 칸에바 라길라길라 돈다라 도스네 삼당 고려제 줄럼 고데 치기 장세.
So the ninth point, train by applying these words in all activities. So in order to cultivate the various qualities of the Dharma, one studies and reflects on what one studies. And in this process, one will also memorize verses that inspire one, that turn one's mind to the Dharma. And here in the practice of taking and giving, this is particularly useful, whereby verses that touch your heart, you have them memorized, and in order to engage in the practice of taking and giving, or prior to that, generating great compassion and bodhicitta, one can recite these verses, and verses that inspire you to take on the suffering of others. May all the suffering of beings ripen up upon me, and may I give all my virtue and happiness to others. In this way of training, one utilizes to aid the practice of taking and giving.
Bendigo dire Sangye Chedon so yu chedon la Janju Bado Dane Gyapson Che Dagi Jin So Jibo Sona Yu Dala Penju San Yu Zhubo Shuo Si Duen Yong Du Sangye Chedon so yu chedon la Si Sangye Che So yu chedon la Jidu Gyamnyo Konju Sangye Konju Che Konju Gidung Konju Tsu Lo Le Pa Jen So yu Janju Bado Dane Gyapso Che Sidu Simja Tamji Sangye Koba Matab Yu Bado Konju Sumliya Gyapso Zhugi Sepe Gyamro Che Dirba Janju Bado Then Tiki Dagi Jinsu give you Tonam Yi Jola Pension in Juba Show City, Ni Dagi Jinsu give you Tonam Yisuding Jimba, Surim Son Sebas, Dinigi gave it our Tella Dine, and then Simja Tamji Sanjuko Montoba Show, said as Jashi Simja Chakura, just adding on the Midu Stingo, what in the Tiki did do not again, Dinigi Gamro Simja Samyata, Jashu Sim, Gula Yawadi Timur, Samunalia di Gamricia, Gamricia. 내 삼는 나라야 심지어도 사유고 버터버 쇼 선배게 자주 심지어디 삼는 나라 디기 호래 제사도 된다 가는 마치디 다산 유처럼 소유처럼 자주 봐도 다니게 다기 신속이 손을 졸라 벤쳤으니 두 번씩 치기 봐뒤에 뒤에도 삼는 나라 공부를 해서 디나시다 제 심지어 템제 대화의 템버 쇼 심지어도 주 동안의 자와 쇼 세도 뒤시 된바이나 소수게 삼문나래 안심제 담지기 동화 담지 달래 민버쇼서 지칸에 발랍 나게 기회자와 대화나 기회자와 탐제 심제 탐제를 당기에 심전제 디기 용화쇼서 도시나 칸에 발라야 돼서
Indeed, also Sangye Church mal dann locker.
세상에 갈라워선 된다 지바르시 상예처럼 소위 친이 된뒤 점로 sem게 슬로라 삼당고레스 디나신다 칸바 sem링이 그 sem제 탐지 동안에 달라 민버쇼스 칸바 라비오디 sem제 탐지 동안에 달라 술 렘바이 뭐가 채워 삼로나 디당고레스 다기 기회서와 간이바 sem제 탐지 민버쇼스 삼당 칸바 라비오디 소소파도 스tam비 뭐가 채워레스 세상 칸바 라비 된다들라 City Palawi Donda de la same ye some nights, Benda Jamlo Simbu Donda some Dana and Chibade said, Pedro Pesano share.
Whatever one recites whilst engaging in the meditation or taking and giving, this is up to oneself. But the meaning would, of course, be: may I take on all the suffering and causes of suffering of beings, and may I give all my virtue and happiness to others. So one verse that everyone knows, and you could utilize this if you wish, is the refuge and bodhicitta verse at the outset, whereby one reciter go for protecting refuge of the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Community until Buddhahood is obtained. By the merit of practicing generosity and the other perfections, may all beings attain enlightenment. So this one can utilize as a means to recite whilst one is engaging in taking and giving, with the meaning being, I take on the suffering of all and I give my virtue to all. This is one illustration, or other verses that touch your heart.
Din Dungura Tine, Semjata Dewa, that the Kuda, Dembar Juche, Semjan Dungala, Dungal Guna, Tawa Juche, Semjan Dungal Mebe, Dewa, and Midava Juche, Semjan Yere Chatanina, Daniel never uses to she the kind of do, and Semishi the Lola, some now come and shower. Just Julan is a city chance at the shower, Semjan Dewa, and the Dembar uses, Cannibal love you do, not similarly as Semjan Dewa, the Dembar shows. The Dewa Demba, the Dewi Guda and Dembar shows. That thing about Simjan, the Dunga, Guda, Java, Uches, Chipan, Sinela, then some knowledge, Simjan, you could Dunga Tata, the Java show, Dunga, you more bacha, the Java, the Java shows, some died, the did what. Just at the Jelam, the Siki chance, the Semeshi, 6 some Dangora, did the Chipati.
Another verse that is widely known is that one in relation to the four immeasurables, where one can engage in reflecting, may all beings be free from suffering and its causes, may all beings have happiness and its causes, may all beings abide in lasting joy, and so forth. And in this way, one can recite a verse to do with the four immeasurables as a means to aid one's practice of taking and giving.
Lama chube cho pudu, lama chube tsik dungorwa, tsik diba kanima dungi dungi, dun assembly dunda de samdangorwa, di jizande tsiki jangas. Tsik ne dun de samdang. Dene dina xing juge da, jigi choha dage da, dene karadunbe na tsik diba dungi dungi, tsiki dunda diba samnala samdangi dangi dangi jiru, tsiki nga niba ti ju, dunda de assembly samdang de shaguro, jizan
This is the same process that when you gather together to do a puja, say Lama Chopa, that you together are reciting verses. And whilst one recites the verse, the meaning is what is arising within you and you reflect on. So likewise here, although it's not structured as a puja is, one takes verses that inspire one, and one has to memorize so that they can go around in one's mind whilst one goes through the process of giving and taking. And the final point, the 10th point in the main practice, commence the sequence with taking from oneself.
Andi da lembi gorim rane zam sidi tangan de donglin ye du shi dongwa da ba de su su ge we za wa san pa dan ya da simje tamji yi ndunga yu da ji chu le de la da dangbo ne de ne sam da de ka le kha bo le ji san de jing a zu shu de bi shi shu ba le ja ka le kha bo le ji san de ne za dangbo ne chung zan de ya chung ne ya gom ge cher ja da gom bo le ji san da de ne gom yo de dangbo dan Bendigo Tonlingi Gomyego Lo Jaya Dangbo Kanichiwasine, so Dangbo Soso Rang Le Gosu Yesior, Lembi Gorim Rane Sams. That Lembi Gorim Rane Sams, Soso Rang Gosum Nana Carrier Esene, that Dunga Lady, Dangbo Soso Rang Dunga di, Tango Sanyi Dunga, Soso Rang Samdan, Sanyi Dunga Yongwea, then Dawaji, Dawa Jema Dunga Yongwea. Mulo Jema Yongwea, Jawa Chima Yongwea, in the shore, and this is Dunga the issues of Sosuke to Lembi Meva Chicha, that Jema, Dawa Jema, Lo Jema, then a Gangate, Dunga Sosu Yongo, Dunga Karag, this Chasa Lenge, that in the Sosu Yongu is being at Lenge, that Sosu Yongu is in Bebache. Then that Mohomba and Yomo Sason was that in the Lenge Dushin, Dene Dushin, Sosuke. Sanyi Dunga, Nani Dunga, Dawa Jema, then Lo Jema, then Jawa Chima, Dushin Lembi, Dunga di Sosu Lembi Mebachi Dushin, Chidi, Gombe, Lodi by Dusman, Shuksher, that seems to have some Begale, that delayed Sanyi Dunga during Lange, Lemba, some Tavena, Chunjurwada, Dunga, Dina Shinta Dushin, some Denmark, Lusu Semtan, Sosugi. Dunga Mohomba, Sosole, Dunga Noyag, Dunga Karayoba, Dunga Yuda Su Lenge, the Mohomba, Dunga Yomoy, Zama Chasos, Babacho Comiati, that Rani the Cosum to Rani the Cosum not the dinner. Dene Cosum the dinner, and then Rangi Yen, Punyada Yen, that Rangi Taho in Yahor, do she some da. Then margin, then Rangi Yahaki Simjan. Mida to draw the Chasa Samda. Then is Semjan Tamjeda, Semja Tamjiki Dungatic Suliada, Dusine Gomgo Gomodore. Then you combine combat power, Shuksher change, Nuludi, Nutopti, Shuksher change, then Semja Tamjiki Dunga, Rang Lemba, Rangeti, Shall Jebadu, combat on 2 years, as that Dambo, when Comjatan to see what is as Mudua. Lembegorum ran at some side.
In general, when one engages in meditation, one should be engaging with sincerity and without pretense, because it's a personal practice. One isn't trying to impress anyone. Therefore, it's important to be honest with oneself. And as mentioned earlier, the practice of taking and giving, suffering from all sentient beings, this really is a bit beyond us right now. At very least, all sentient beings is just a concept. It doesn't really mean anything yet. That still needs to be cultivated, let alone the sincere wish that we receive all their suffering in place of them, and all the causes of happiness, instead of ripening in our lives, ripen for them. This is something we can say, but we don't really mean. So therefore, it's skillful for us to start the taking and giving meditation with oneself, and then expand it to others. And when one then engages in taking and giving, one imagines what problems one is likely to encounter today, and one will follow that with what one is likely to encounter tomorrow or next week or next month, and what one may encounter in years to come. And you just imagine these being taken on, and the happiness that is then expelled, this is remaining within you. So you are imagining that your future, in your future, from today, from when you rise from this meditation cushion, through this meditation, all the problems, suffering, and difficulties you encounter, will be manageable. You'll be able to deal with them successfully. Through dealing with this, through dealing with the hardships that you are going to encounter, you generate confidence. I can deal with this. And in this way, one starts taking and giving with oneself. Thereafter, one can relate it to those that one is close to. So in the meditation then, imagine one's loved ones, those that one's close to, one's family, one's dear friends. Imagine taking on all their problems and difficulties, imagining them gaining enlightenment. And then take it further to all beings in your community, all beings in your nation, and eventually all sentient beings. So the meditation process is really the same. What is new is that one should start with oneself, and only thereafter move to those that one is closest to. And with oneself, one is imagining taking on the problems that will befall you, and taking them on. And by the outcome of the meditation, you have the confidence, I can deal with them. They will not overwhelm me.
then Didan Digi, Shanlaya Sharshabari, Benekarasong, the Semja Tamja, Dunga, and Trahudu, Sembege, Samno Indo, Dungan, Tradu, Injishimokevada, da, Dambo, Soso Rana in Kangala Samdarang, Soso Rana, Dunga, Nasu Samda, Soso Rana, Dunga, Targu, Sempe, Samno, Shu, Shimbuji, Makevana, Semja Tamjele, Yetuege Kalehabore. The Enza Dambo, Sosu, Dunga di Gargari Yumupati to Samta, the Yabohako Vache, Dene Sosu Kori Dunga Deda Tarko de Sempigi, Tarduki Samno Shushim the Ge, Deniam Jene, Dene, Shasim Jatamjel Dushin Samtamana, Le Layo, as Kazanado, Wondru Kabla, such Dunga Samda, Darwa, Dene Wishi Kabla, that the Kunzu Chanju Simja Dunga the Jada Samdadu, Jazan Wondru Nalanielia, Sosu Kori Dunga, Samtan. Dunga de la Targo to Sempe, some of the Jayadi Garsene, Nishambu Yegi, Jaya, some Shansim Dunga, Jaw, some of the Lawa, Dondala, Chango, Chesa, Dambo Limbi Corimsa, Chesa that, the Lemba Sadipa, Tita, Dambo Jambi Corim Ran, and some Labna, Jiba Chadu, watches Dambo Denig Dunga, some Dambo Rani to some Tarani to some Dani Yamnota, Denig Yamuchudu, Shansim Jatamjela, some time and Niji, Lucy Panto, what is it?
Similar to what I mentioned earlier in this afternoon, to draw the link between this meditation here and what one will have done prior in the meditation. And that to have a genuine wish to free all sentient beings from suffering, which is an indispensable requirement for the actual mind of compassion, the Buddhist mind of compassion, or what Buddhists mean by compassion, one has to, before that, have a wish for oneself to be free of suffering. If one merely wishes for others to be free of, for example, illness, but not taking care of one's own health, that's really not very skillful at all. If one wants others to be free of afflictions whilst one's own mind is still overwhelmed by afflictions, this is not skillful at all. It's not being honest with oneself. Because right now, we are very concerned with our own well-being. So we recognize that, we start where we are. And this is why one needs to first train in the preliminaries. So the very first point there, first train in the preliminaries. Because through meditating well on true sufferings and true origins, on the basis of meditating on precious human rebirth and its impermanence, one will give rise to a wish, I don't want to suffer anymore. I want to gain freedom from being born without any control in samsara. I want to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara, gain my liberation. So this is the training of that's shared with the being of intermediate capacity. It's a cultivation of the mind of definite emergence or renunciation. And it is the preliminary to engaging in the trainings of the being of great capacity. To the extent that that preliminary is developed, then the meditation on emptiness, one will have the energy and the discipline to engage in it, and one will have the basis to actually develop compassion, not merely a wish, but real compassion. So therefore, we have as a 10th point, commence a sequence with taking from oneself. This we should all do, because we are still training in the preliminaries. So we need to develop this mind still of definite emergence, this determined attitude, I do not want to suffer anymore, therefore I have to abandon ignorance. And so we then, when we later engage in the meditation on taking and giving, do so in relation to oneself. So again, I hope I'm making clear both why the preliminaries are indispensable and shouldn't just be glossed over, and secondly, this circular relationship between the earlier and latter practices, how they are interdependent and one enhances the other.
semjala tablam dunga segi tablam de lam gome nimbo den gomgo or pa tenje lapje kondola nyamso lenjuje ane semje dunga seada degi duya de den ko orwa dene zada semje tamjigi semjal pa degi dunga seada degi duya ge degi duya la ma den ko gore den bala soso ran shin ko orwa je 제가 den nyamle rimba de dangbo soso ran shin ko orwa da dangbo 자비고 그럼 라네 잠세데 제가 냠내 림바 담보 소소하는 고고래 제가 소소히 야고 신배나 파절에 댄신 거래 소소 마신의 댄신 거말 제가 소소 담보 소소하나 야고 차고 고래 차고 봐서 소소 신고 고래 제가 담보 소소하는 게 냠녀 야고 롭자 야고 고고래 제가 대인자 샘제 탐지 고려 동안을 좋아라 담보가 성기고 토고도 집에 자주 샘게 좀 전들이 제상 산이요 고번 토바나 아니 캠바 탈침바레 빵바 탈침바레 제사 디니 자다 현리에 땡야레 로버체레 강아 가요 말에 가리나 제투부리에서 제사 튀긴디리 제사데 데네자 샘제 탐주 동아자다 샘제 탐주 디기리요 고발라 담보 소소라랑기 냠리기 냠리리 바 똑바지 소소기래 기고고리에서 제사 단다디 고도요고 다디 렘베 고름 라네 잠나로다 장비 고름 라네 잠남나다 소소 냠내제 냠내림 바라네 잠세 샤레 냠내 주주걸로 소스당보 냠내 고레스 랑네 제 되는 샤레 제주그래서야지
I want to really emphasize this point because all too often we think our focus needs to be on others, and whilst this is laudable, to actually generate the attitude that is sincerely focused on the welfare of others, one first needs to cultivate the wish for oneself to be freed from suffering. This sequence is definite. If you are wanting to benefit others, but haven't taken care of yourself, you will not be able to benefit others. Because what we have seen is that the reason beings suffer is because of their ignorance. And the way to abandon ignorance is to cultivate the opposing wisdom. So therefore, what beings require is to be guided in firstly how to recognize ignorance and the role it plays, and then be guided how to cultivate wisdom to gain freedom. So if you are wanting to help beings, this is the help you need to give them. Guide them to recognize the faults of ignorance, and how to cultivate wisdom. You cannot guide others unless you've learned this, understood it yourself. And if you have only come to know it intellectually, your guidance will be extremely limited. You need to have personalized it, gained your own personal experience so that you are sharing not mere book knowledge, but you're sharing from your own lived experience. So therefore, whilst holding the wish to eventually be a great being, a bodhisattva, a being who's of direct and remarkable benefit to others, I have to first cultivate qualities taking care of my own mind, so that by subduing my own afflictions, progressing towards my own liberation, I then develop my capacity to be of real benefit to others, to be of actual benefit to others, free of self-interest. So therefore, it's imperative that one focuses on recognizing one's own condition and applying solutions to one's own condition, but within the overall framework of eventually being able to help others. So the mind of bodhicitta, this is a mind that is characterized by the wish to guide all beings to gain freedom from suffering, and in order to do so, I must become a Buddha. So that first part has come about through recognizing why one suffers and that I can gain freedom from it. That part has to be done in relation to oneself. And therefore, to say as an aside, some translations will call this self-compassion. Then one needs to lift that gaze and place it on others, recognizing all beings are in the same predicament, but I'm limited still. I have to go beyond limitation, become a Buddha for their sake. So therefore, there is a definite sequence on needing to look at one's own mind, radically transform one's own mind, but with a general motivation that this will enable me to be of benefit to others. And then, when one has made radical transformation, one's beneficial activities will be sincere. There won't be a mere expression of doing the right thing, but it'll be an expression of who you are, a bodhisattva.
Ana deso jibare danganzo jizo ilegaran na jibar hawada susugi shanliya pemba tuyege shanliya lobdune karchevene jiki lega inada sheyun toni inada dene zemo inada shen pangi labje khonzulu pando jubin sambaina pa labyala dambo susa shingoruwa 제상 소소 신발을 소 장고 거로다 제상 소소 신발이나 제모치 소소 제야고 제신은 샹리아 두수 제고를 살아야 요래 제상 데니기 지신 제모 야고 제기 야고지 차 쇠발라 다 소수기 소고이나 소수기 장고 거래 소수기 친구 거래 제상 담보 소수기 신발제 되는 샬라 납신바제 다시 루신의 가리네 멤버로 가리네 소수기 연대 장신 되는 샬라 납신네 샹리아 지게 강한세다 파도 주에 뒤로와 대례가로시나 되네로 소소 레가레다 칼라서는 소소 야보 소요 신배는 한시알이도 소소요를 납 되네신 지산 당보 소소랑 가리네 레가 가리네 샹레 납제 판도 주야라 소소랑 신고구로 지발도다 되네기 최초 돈이나 섬나나 지발에 되네간도 지딘 제위 담스 제위고 섬다베네 소소 샹레 납제 판도 주발라 소소 당보 소소기 납야라 소소 신고구로 소소 신발라 소소 장도로 지고라 지산 당보 랑 잠세디 차상리제 돈다 자신으로 고투야 도와디.
This process is the same as by which the rules of which society operates, in that if one has the wish to interact with others in a specific way, you yourself need to be sufficiently skilled to interact with them. So if you have a love of a particular sport and you'd like to share that love with others and perhaps be a coach, you need to be pretty good at what you're doing and have a good understanding and be skilled in the expression of that particular sport. Otherwise, what are you going to do? You can clap and cheer, but you're not going to be much of a coach. And if it's a field of education of any kind, you need to be educated. Otherwise, what are you going to say? Or if it's any particular profession other than teaching, whether it's medicine or any profession, one needs to be skilled in that. Otherwise, one is going to be nothing more than a charlatan. So too here in the Dharma. In order to be able to have really meaningful benefit to others, one has to have trained and transformed one's own mind first.
네. 네. 다디 먼저 가서 동반이고 또야고 동반이 제베제다 도시는 제바제 동이 도당기 림바지 이제 안디는 거데 니제 신보도 신의 계단기 림바 냠는 제다 근데 니 신보기네 심제다 사요고 바토버 쇼시 션시심 기비 림바데 도시는 쉬바르와 다디니 뱀마세이다 계체셔네네 계체셔데 조어를 샤고래.
So thus far in our time together, we've really covered some incredibly important points. First the preliminaries, then yesterday we looked at the stages of meditation for cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, and today we've looked at the stages of meditation for cultivating great compassion. These are the two primary minds of the Mahayana, great compassion and the wisdom realizing emptiness.
난 이 데네기 타바침비게 잠니제다 저sem 동반이고 냠는지 림바디 아주 네 제르미치게 람림나 송발페 마시타 데네기 림바빵 젠도신의 손샤게데 베지 안절이야 베마시 판도 침보로 예데바레 안디나시 준주 침보나리아 데네기다 장쇼sem게 다 파진 주의 냠는지 마제네 데냠는지 다 림바 동바 잠니제다 자주셈 되는 동반이 있고 도시에 뱀마세 개바 도시 소시데 뱀 야보 차대로디 직 데려와다 되네 디송네 고직 뒤뒤 직스마드 메데 대고서 예만의 냠는지 검시 예딩을做了 어두수 장월 제자세데 직직세야데 손셔바디가 남성 고도에 작업마다 만들 예 담보라 디지라 직고 직직이 고도에 내가 가고 차고로와 제가 되네자 먼저 레당 원래 냠는 제디 약속되다 넘리침보다 주주침보되게 차고래 나 되네게 냠용 되네게 따네 냠용 갈아가서 싸차바 있나 아두도 스타반다 남사 로샤도 어디에 들에서 되는 냠는 제를 고급도 하고요.
These primary minds of the Mahayana, or principal minds of the Mahayana, love and compassion on one hand, and the wisdom realizing emptiness on the other. These, the Mahayana tradition, are all focused on guiding in how to cultivate. So here we can think of the great Lama text by Lama Tsongkhapa, both the middling and the great, whereby there are stages to train one's mind in, the preliminaries, and then the actual trainings of the actual main practices of great compassion and bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness are presented in exquisite detail, with detail on every single step of training one needs to engage in so that one can become a bodhisattva and then an Arya bodhisattva. Shantideva's text also presents the training in a particularly beautiful way, with an emphasis on the trainings of the bodhisattva, the deeds of the bodhisattva. So this text is very brief. As we can see, it's just a few pages. So the intended audience is quite different. The intended audience of this brief text is for those who are already learned in particular the Lamrim, as well as the bodhisattva's way of life. In that is where one gains the knowledge required to cultivate each step correctly and completely. Where this text, the role this text, or text like this plays, is that for those who are already greatly educated, and again, educated in the Dharma means both not just intellectual, but that it's been cultivated within, a text like this is very brief. It can be committed to memory, one can recall the lines, and all that knowledge and meditation one has done prior will arise, and one can use it as a meditation manual. So this is the purpose of these kinds of brief texts. They are for those who are already well learned. So for ourselves, as beginners, texts like this, we should relate to them as for inspiration, to develop our motivation to continue to engage well, to put energy into our trainings in texts like the Lamrim or Shantideva's Bodhisattva way of life.
나디네 sumba
So of the 7 points, we've looked at 2, and now we can start with the third, transforming adversity into the path to enlightenment.
산지 고방 토픽이 야 귤이야 귤투바지 제월에 세월에 donda 산지 고방 토바 장춥스네 산지 고방과 제자 산지 고방 토픽이 람도 귤투고레스 강아디기 귤투바지 그 제월에 숨으로 긴야 람도 교와세데.
So looking at this title, transforming adversity into the path to enlightenment. So in our own lives, we encounter so much adversity. And it's certainly the case for bodhisattvas, those who are engaging with suffering beings, wanting to guide them to attain enlightenment. So the bodhisattva will encounter a tremendous amount of adversity, and this point is about how to transform adverse circumstances into mental paths that lead to the attainment of enlightenment. So that, in other words, to take an adverse circumstance and use it and relate to it in a skillful manner so that one is creating the causes that will lead to enlightenment. This is the meaning of path to enlightenment, creating the causes that will lead to enlightenment. So looking at the first, when the world and its inhabitants are filled with negativities, transform adversity into the path to enlightenment.
차로마지비 템바 땅에서 돈도를 따위나 돈도마 차로마지 강한 제도 되네 주균지 이들에 되네 뇌세대 사지티체 당뇨리 사실을 강하게 강하게 가리 리고를 선들이야 갈리고는 먼저 돈도 따나 차로마지나 강하지로와 양지게 차로마지비 양 차로 망타나 출로집내 강하지로와 강하로와 다 귀인디니게 네버 몽골리고로 네버 가르가르리오서는 출로게 강하 매 강하 안에 가서래 사염예 강하 데니게 룽수비에 강하 데네 강하지네 강하 네버 몽고지 용고로 받아 데니스 용고레스 데네 용도에 가서 갈래고 가르 용고라서네 데네 셈 약강하 몽고지고로 와 소소에 돈도 답셔바네 룽수 겹지 돈도 벤 출로와 겹지 돈도 매버다 셈들이 아다 게 돈도 되게 매바 차선습이 다 돈 뇌기 출로와 잡아대 강아지 니가래야 여바지 강아지 니가래야 소소 삼문 나라 가서 당에 매바 차선 빼사선습이 셈들 강아지 울리거와 제사다 뇌기 꽤 갈가를 용어서 디레다 세 매셔야 안에 출로와 잡야 안에 사염 잡야 안에 지금 데니게 룽수야야 메셔야 데니게 돈의 중시 뇌배 돈의 중시 뇌배 강아 먹고 중고를 받아 냄시 장차배 강아 데니게 차차배 강아 데니 중고레스 제산 뇌기 강아 데니데 용고레스 데니게 용고레스 제산 데니 갑라 나 저기 다 데니게 강아디 장주람의 주구르에서 깽엔이 뒤로 와 강아 뒤로 와 네 장주람의 주구르에서는 산주고방 퇴비게 남의 주르야지도 요마로 와다 출로디 예산조고마 되게 남의 줄세 요마로바 남의 줄세도 나 갈라고 해서는 데니기 예비 갑라 만소야 강아 데니 채바체 니가래야 소수게 삼로 땅타토네 산마다 강아 심마기와체 강아 휴지기 예서다 다 돈다라 데니 강아 예비 갑라 뉘 데니기 뉘세를 중요도 심려야 강아 마채바체 만소 삼모티 파 개위 삼로 땅제 야 산조고마 되게 귤이야 귤투바 제고래 해서다. 네, 거 셈마데 현다 셈마데.
So the first word in the Tibetan I've translated as world. Literally it means vessel, and the second word I've translated as inhabitants. So in other translations this is the container and contained. The meaning is the world and its inhabitants. So the world, so Genlanat spoke about this term world. So it refers to the place where we are. And in this place where we are, this natural environment, this is a place where one encounters many events, and these events have an impact on us, and that impact, a negative impact on us. So particularly thinking perhaps in natural events, so that there can be floods, there can be drought, and so forth, or any variety of natural events. These then can lead to the mind of beings being disturbed, being unhappy, so worrying, concerned, and so forth. So adversity in relation to the world needs to be, the second line, transformed into the path to enlightenment. So when we're talking about adversity coming from the natural environment, from our material world, so not just maybe in English you'd say the material world, so yeah, the entirety of it. When it talks about transforming that into the path to enlightenment, what it is not meaning is taking the material world and transforming that into a mental path leading to enlightenment, but rather a way of relating to, thinking about the material world. Instead of a way of relating to the adversity arising from our material world, instead of that leading to non-virtue, we transform it into virtue that's directed at the eventual attainment of Buddhahood. So this is the meaning then of transforming adversity from the material world into the path to enlightenment. We're transforming our way of thinking about problems and difficulties and suffering that arises from the material world. We transform that way of thinking, not necessarily the world itself, but transform our way of thinking so that we are creating the causes, creating a mental path that will lead to Buddhahood.
강바 교보 기공 차샤 시와 차샤 강바는 토마 추사기도 되네 안에 강바 안에 지게 삽된디게 철라 쇼샤사다 모자디게 인보차샤 콜로도샤 되네신 강아 먹고 줘야 용고를 받아 되네 강아 유에도 강아지 녀바 강아 되네 용고 태고를 와 되네 태비에 갑라 아주 셈마기바 용고를 와다 제사 되네게 셈마기바 마제바제 되네 셈마기바 제바나 디 강아 유직 뇌이 전에 강아 중어디 소소의 셈마기바 전에 강아디 니사 차로 거래서 동아 망아 용고래 제사 되네 갑라 셈디 강아 마제바제 되네 삼로 땅하디 기위촌에 삼다제 장주 산주 고모 투비 규를 줘야게 기위 초라 삼다투에 제와데 계침을 해서 거다.
So we, again looking at this term world, so there's the world, the general world, the expansive world we share, and then there's our own specific individual world. So our own home, the life we live, this too is encompassed here. So our own individual home, for example, our own individual lived experience, this too is a place in which we experience many problems. So there can be floods across our region, or our home can get flooded. There can be a great bushfire across the region, or our house can burn down. So in other words, this term world we relate to in both the expansive as well as the personal. And so in terms of the personal, our way, when we experience problems from our own world, our own home and so forth, if our way of thinking is normal, unskillful, our problems and difficulties we encounter are only magnified. Whereas if we, through taking unwanted circumstances in our own individual life, and we transform that, we think about it differently, we transform that into a path, into the accumulation of virtue, that will lead to enlightenment. This is a skillful way that a practitioner responds to the challenges in their life. So here, this term world, we should understand in both the expansive understanding as well as our own particular lived experience.
Denegi and the go Junshe, Gortaya, Denegi, Tonegi, Semje, Nala, Deninga Julia, Denegi, Ganga, Mango, Tigor, the Yungor, Denegi, Jezada, Dusene, Yungor, Juyitone. Jezna Denegi, Yubi Gabla, Tangazuki, Nichike, Semdi, Makiba Chada, Ganga Chaji, Chagores. Jezna Deniza. Dene sem kanga chikim dene ge ju thone dene kanga yudi kapla danga ju diga le sem ma ji ba che ba na dene nga ju sem ma ji ba che khon la dene ndu ju wores chisa dene kapla sem ma ji ba ma che ba che nga ju samlo ti ge wi cho nyam le che che an sang ju ko ba thwe bi ju ju ge nyam le che to ba che wores wor da.
The second term translated as inhabitants. Again, elsewhere one comes across this as the container, and this would be the contained, or the world and its beings. So the inhabitants of this world. So this then refers to a second general source of harm, of suffering, and this is between beings themselves, whereby beings harm each other through acts of physical violence or verbal violence, harm each other through conflict, again, physical conflict, or through speaking with aggression, harm each other through deceiving others, taking advantage of others. There's a wide variety of ways that beings interact in a way that causes harm. So when one is the recipient of harmful behavior, how one deals with this is the subject matter here. That instead of responding in either an unskillful way, and one accrues non-virtue, or just dismissing it, one actually makes the most of the opportunity, transforms the opportunity, embraces it, in that one creates the causes that will lead to enlightenment. Again, this is the meaning of a path, cultivating a mental path, cultivating virtue that leads to enlightenment. So the first point was from the material world, and the second is from the inhabitants of the material world. 포완의 출루가 강화서도 뉴뉴만 망고쇼로 아데니게 망고 용거래스 제가 데니 용어에 갑라 킹엔 강아디게 킹엔 데니 체외 갑라 삼노티 삼노 마기바 소소게 베 삼노 마기바 데니게 제네 콩로나 데니 제바이나 디갈이야 강아 체 차고래스 제가 데니게 주당 안에 뇌당 주기 데니게 강아 망고 킹엔 망고 체뒤 갑라 남사 소소라는 게 삼노티 삼로 시디다 안세모 구양부 안에 제제 사수 삼로티 안에 데니게 강하게 삼로 마다와체 안에 가르고서네 셈제 탐지게 된다 산지고마 토비기 귤조 토비기 게위 냠는 제고레서 월다 더르데 디스모레 안에 유고 람데 귤스티네 귤투바 제고레서 월다 단 간네 제고레스네 제다디 냠는 제다디 산이 되는 바슈야레 다디 된다 디스모레 뇌다 주유권에 강함하고 체어도
디가 량도 셈마기바 제대로는 디치교 말레스 강가 체류 갑라 먼저 삼로데 삼로 콘로랑 마기바 디네 차바나 강가 니자레 판도스카요 말레스 세상 디네 인자 먼저 삼로디 기위 삼로다 안에 지게 야 상기 요고번 토예기 유식 차야기 조토예기 삼로데 땅토고 제도가 지어버려서 오다经验 장주람도 교로서야 되지스모래 经验特别告诉虐党注意告诉的那个经验嘛我切记告不出然给sem的是的把配团呢说是三落地年龄节的呀三九个嘛特别个有做特别去做下去了三落当特别结果的也是短大的生活定义的
When the world and its inhabitants are filled with negativities, talk a bit about filled. So this first word, so the world or container. So we can imagine a container, a vessel filled to the brim with water, for example. So this is the meaning here of the world filled. Or one can also imagine in terms of inhabitants, someone who's particularly afflicted, filled with afflictions. Or in our own lived experience where one's life appears to have problem after problem after problem. So this is the reality of samsara, that it is filled with negativities. And this terminology is utilized here to emphasize that no matter how challenging something is, no matter how hard it is, this is something that we need to cultivate the skill so as to transform this adversity into the path to enlightenment. So then this second line, transform adversity into the path to enlightenment. This, especially this transform, this should show that what one is wanting to do is transform our response to what we encounter. So this is a very much an inner development where we're not trying to change the world or change other people. We are trying to transform our way of responding to life's challenges, life's difficulties. The general way that people respond is with anger, with worry, with attachment, wanting things to go the way they desire and so forth. When one's response is afflicted, it only hurts the afflicted person and those to whom they express their afflictions. So what we're trying to transform is, instead of facing adversity with afflictions, to rather respond with virtuous minds. And in this way, we transform an adverse circumstance, which would otherwise or usually lead to the accumulation of causes or suffering. We now lead to the we respond so as to accumulate causes for happiness, in particular the happiness of Buddhahood for the sake of others. So in brief, transforming adversity refers to transforming our way of thinking, so that when we encounter adverse circumstances, our natural response becomes one of virtue rather than an afflicted response. So then thank you. We can conclude there for this afternoon. And tomorrow we'll continue here and continue to look at transforming adversity into the path to enlightenment. Thank you.